Valley with unbearable summer heat exceeding 120 degrees. My family, considered below the poverty level, we grew up on the welfare system. We lived off food stamps, school lunch tickets, and Medi-Cal. My father, Concho, was a migrant worker, and my mom was a stay-at-home mom. They provided the best they could for my brother, sister, and me. When I turned 12, my mom told us that our dad wanted us to visit him. I felt confused because my dad lived with us and would be home from work soon. My mom told us that our father, Concho, the man we grew up with, was not actually our biological father. Rather, our biological father was Ralph and lived in Tracy, California. I don't remember having strong feelings of hurt, sadness, or anger with this blow. Rather, the idea of another man being my father was so strange to me because Concho provided everything I needed in a father. He was the dad who taught me how to catch a football, took me to Little League. He supported and cared for me like a father. Shortly after learning about Ralph, Mom planned for us to visit him. However, both my brother and sister told our mom they did not want to go see Ralph because my sister knew of Ralph beating on my mom. That's why she left him. So my mom planned the trip, sending me alone to visit him. The day arrived for my visit. Mom packed my suitcase. We got into our old beat-up station wagon with my mom and dad in the front seat and me alone in the back. After a few stops and turns, we arrived at the destination, the Greyhound bus depot. We got out of the car and entered the bus terminal. At the door of the bus, Mom reached down and pinned a sign to the front of my t-shirt that said, Tracy, California. That's it. Not my name, not my address, not my phone number, just my destination. Concho handed me a lunch bag. Mom led me onto the bus, seated me right behind the driver. She kissed my forehead and said, I love you, mijo, and that she would see me soon. I don't remember much of the trip, but it must have been several hours for the 475-mile bus trip from the Imperial Valley to Tracy. When I arrived in Tracy, I finally met Ralph. The next several days were a blur, an uneventful blur. The only thing I remember from that summer vacation was Ralph leaving for work early in the morning and coming home late at night. Every morning, he would leave money on the kitchen table for me to buy lunch at the local taco shop, Mi Ranchito. Ralph told me not to wander off, but it was fine for me to go to Mi Ranchito because he knew the owners. So each day I would wake up, get dressed, pick up the money Ralph left on the table, go to the taco shop, and have lunch. I got to know the family who owned Mi Ranchito, so my days were spent hanging out there, not doing much of anything. I go back to Ralph's place late in the afternoon and watch TV and wait for him to come home. The thing I do remember, when he would get home from work, he would sit in this old lazy boy recliner, open up a beer, and watch TV. We didn't talk. We just sat there watching whatever was on. This was how my first summer vacation with Ralph went. And so did the next two visits. Each time by myself, each time the same pattern. Ralph going to work in the morning, coming home late at night only to drink. When I was 15, Ralph once again was no longer in my life, and it didn't bother me. The remainder of my teenage years were spent with my mom, dad, brother, and sister. Now fast forward several years, I was 39 years old. I returned home from work to find a business card tucked into the corner of the front door of my apartment. The card was from the San Diego coroner's office. I turned the card over, and there was a handwritten note asking me to contact them as soon as possible. So I called the number immediately from my cell phone and asked for the person on the card. I gave them my name, and they placed me on a brief hold. Then a man with a deep, raspy voice came on the line. He asked me if I knew a man by the name of Ralph Jasmin Romero. I told him, yes, that's my brother. And then he told me that Ralph had died. Sudden chill came over my body as the shock and sadness swarmed around me. The gentleman gave me a phone number and the name of a person I needed to speak with at the coroner's office as the next of kin needed to take care of some burial matters. Once I hung up the phone, I immediately called my sister and asked if she had seen my brother. She said no, not for a few days. I didn't want to tell her what happened until I figured out how to take care of the situation. I then called the phone number that the coroner's office gave me and asked for Mrs. Jones. When she got on the phone, I explained to her what had transpired during the last couple of hours. I remember the next few words clear as day. I'm sorry to tell you, but Ralph Romero was killed in a work accident in Tracy. Now this confused me because my brother never worked and didn't live in Tracy, but instead was homeless and a drug addict living in the streets of the Imperial Valley. Suddenly I realized who had died. Ralph Asmin Romero Sr., my biological father. In order for the burial to take place, the next of kin needed to sign paperwork, so I called my sister back and told her what happened. She told me in a very harsh, stern voice, "Do whatever you want, I don't want to know anything." So a few days later, I was on the road, headed to Tracy to bury Ralph, once again, alone. I drove to the ranch where Ralph had lived and worked for over 35 years. I was told to ask for Ken, the owner of the ranch and Ralph's boss. When I arrived at the ranch and got out of the car, a tall, older white man waved to me, who I presumed was Ken. I started to walk towards him. He stood there in his dusty blue jeans with a big brass buckle and a straw cowboy hat, just staring at me, motionless. As I approached him, I reached out my hand and said, "Hi, I'm Rene Romero, Ralph's son." He kept his gaze fixed on me and seemed slow to speak, eventually reaching out his hand to meet mine, and then he said, "You look exactly like your father looked 30 years ago. It's like I'm seeing a ghost right now." Ken was shocked and wanted to talk more about it, but I didn't feel anything. He told me he was taking care of all the burial expenses. He also told me he was surprised to learn that Ralph had an ex-wife and children, as Ralph had never mentioned anything about my family. Ken then told me that Ralph had actually become close to two young Mexican immigrants, a brother and a sister, and that Ralph had done a lot to help them. In fact, one of them, Jose, wanted to meet me. Jose confided in me that Ralph was going to help him and his sister get citizenship, but they had not finished the paperwork. After a few minutes of talking, Jose asked me for one thing of Ralph's belongings, a picture to remember Ralph by. I said I would leave him a picture. Jose departed, and I continued to go through Ralph's things, and in a pile of paper on Ralph's tables, I came across two particular documents, copies of me and my sister's birth certificates. At first I thought it was strange, and that he did have my brother's as well, but then it hit me. He was planning to use our birth certificates to help Jose and his sister get illegal papers. This whole experience stirred up strange and mixed feelings for me. Not after having much feelings or emotions about Ralph and whether he was in or out of my life, I suddenly had a lot of emotions related to him. No, he wasn't the father he should be. He wasn't there to provide for me. He didn't teach me how to play sports. He didn't help me with homework or act silly with me. My few visits with him were uneventful, and we didn't share much of anything, even when we had the opportunities to talk. But now that he is gone, I discovered his attempts to use me and my sister as a way to help someone else, rather than to be the father we needed. I finally did have a lot of emotions. And by emotions, let me be specific. I was pissed. I was happy for Jose and his sister to have someone who had been so good to them, But on the other hand, I was so angry that Ralph treated these two strangers than he treated his own biological children. Thank you, Dad.